On September 19, 1944, as the morning fog smothered the French countryside around Arracourt, something impossible was unfolding beneath the silence. American Sherman tanks, thinner armored, less powerful, and mocked by German crews, were on the verge of turning the battlefield upside down. But how could the weaker machine defeat the stronger one? What secret allowed an outgunned force to shred the most feared armored vehicle of the war? And why have historians argued for decades that this battle should have never been won by the Shermans? The answer lies in a single terrifying truth. What happened here broke every expectation, every calculation, and every German belief about tank warfare. Now the question is, what exactly happened in those fog-choked fields that turned the Panther into a predator suddenly hunted? On September 18, 1944, the hills near Arracourt were wrapped in a dense, bone-white fog, the kind that swallowed shapes, erased direction, and made the world feel smaller than a man's breath. Somewhere within that shifting haze, soldiers from the U.S. 4th Armored Division waited behind hedgerows, tank hulls dim shapes under wet canvas, engines silent and cold. They had no idea that within 24 hours they would be fighting one of the most unbalanced tank battles of the entire war, a fight in which they were expected to lose quickly, brutally, and without mercy. The Panther tank was Germany's armored pride: heavier armor, bigger gun, longer range, deadlier front plate, sleeker design. The Sherman was a battlefield workhorse, reliable, fast, easy to build. But in a direct duel, especially front-on, it was almost always second best. Sherman crews knew this. They told jokes to hide it, cursed at night about it, and whispered stories of Panthers punching through Sherman hulls like paper. But America had one thing working in its favor: experience. The men at Arracourt were not green recruits. They were veterans, tired, dirty, scarred by months of fighting, and they understood the ground, the weather, and the tactics better than most of their German opponents. At the command post of the U.S. 37th Tank Battalion, Colonel Creighton Abrams leaned over a map, his fingers tracing roads, ridgelines, and farm routes like veins in the earth. Abrams was known for one thing: refusing to lose. He had a reputation for catching the enemy off guard, attacking from angles nobody expected, and using the terrain as a weapon. But this time, something was different. Something didn't feel right. Late that night, scouts reported strange movement east of Arracourt. Armor rolling through the fog, engines rumbling low, somewhere out in the blackness. German tanks were approaching. Not just one, not a patrol, a formation. Panthers, many of them. Abrams stared at the map, eyes fixed on the direction the Germans were coming from. He had barely 24 Shermans in immediate range. The Germans had far more. But he also knew the Panthers had weaknesses. Their guns were difficult to aim at close range, their turrets slow to traverse, their side armor vulnerable. If he could lure the Panthers closer, close enough that long-range advantages disappeared, the Shermans had a fighting chance. Not a good chance, not a safe chance, but a chance. He ordered his tank crews into ambush positions on the rolling hills and wheat fields near the town of Arracourt. Engines rumbled to life, crews tightened straps, loaded shells, whispered prayers. Then silence returned. The fog thickened, and dawn crept toward them like a warning. The German Panther crews, meanwhile, believed they were about to stage a decisive breakthrough. Hitler's orders were clear: punch through American lines, retake territory, and cripple U.S. momentum before winter. The Panthers were fresh machines, many just delivered, many crewed by newly trained men who had never been in combat. Their commanders had studied diagrams and manuals, not wounds and fear. They had been told victory was inevitable. The Panthers were unbeatable. They would soon learn how wrong that was. The next morning, at first light, a Panther platoon rolled slowly through the mist south of Arracourt. The tank commander scanned the horizon from his cupola. Nothing but gray. No vehicles, no infantry, no movement at all. He radioed to the others that the sector was clear. It wasn't. Hidden on the slopes overlooking the valley were several U.S. Shermans, engines off, crews silent, watching through scopes and binoculars. They saw shadows moving, long shadows, tank shadows. But instead of firing instantly, they waited, risky, terrifying, unnatural waiting. The Shermans needed the Panthers to get close enough to nullify the German range advantage, close enough to punch shells into the vulnerable side armor. Minutes dragged, the fog thinned, and then, as if the German tanks had stepped through a curtain, the first Panther silhouette appeared, broad, dark, unmistakable. A Sherman gunner whispered, "Range just under 600, turret side exposed, ready to fire." The tank commander made a decision. Fire. The Sherman roared, the muzzle flash lit the fog like lightning. The shells slammed into the Panther side plate, one place the armor wasn't heavy enough to save them. Sparks flew, armor shattered, the Panther lurched, smoke pouring from its turret. Before the German crew inside could recover, a second Sherman fired, then a third. The Panther stopped moving. Inside the battered tank, panic and fire spread at the same speed. The hatch burst open, and a crewman crawled out, jacket smoking, screaming orders. But another explosion rocked the hull, and the man disappeared in flame. It was over. One Panther gone. But that was only the beginning. More shapes emerged through the fog. 3 Panthers, 5, 8. A whole German spearhead pushing west. They rolled forward, believing they were hunting Americans. In reality, they were walking into jaws. Abrams' radio crackled with frantic voices. "Enemy armor moving in force. 2 Panthers heading north of the road. We're outnumbered." Abrams grabbed the handset. "We're not here to run. We're here to kill Panthers in close. Keep 'em blind. Keep 'em guessing." The Shermans shifted positions constantly, firing, moving, hiding, firing again. The Panthers struggled to find firing angles. Their long guns, designed for distance, were nearly useless when targets appeared at 500 yards or less. Their turrets turned slowly, painfully slowly, while Shermans darted like quick claws across the terrain. At one point, a single Sherman tank, commanded by Sergeant Lafayette Poole, slid behind a hedgerow, fired 3 shells in 13 seconds, and punched through 2 Panthers before escaping again into the fog. German commanders were stunned. This wasn't supposed to be happening. One Panther unit radioed headquarters, claiming they were under attack by a superior enemy force with heavy tanks. But the Germans weren't facing heavy tanks. They were facing Shermans, lighter, faster, coordinated, experienced. The truth was simple. The Germans had brought better machines to the battlefield, but the Americans brought better tactics. Hours passed. Shells cracked through the air. Tanks burned across the fields. The smell of metal, smoke, and wet earth clung to every breath. Panthers tried to withdraw, regroup, re-aim, but every movement exposed another flaw. Their side armor thinned, their engines overheated, their visibility was poor, and worst of all, their commanders could barely see. The fog refused to lift. By afternoon, as the sun began to melt the mist, the battlefield revealed a grim truth. American Shermans stood across the fields, mostly intact. German Panthers lay burning in clusters. The German 113th Panzer Brigade, so confident at dawn, was bleeding steel and fire. Their momentum stalled. their belief shattered, and their crews were only beginning to understand why the battle was slipping away. Because the Panthers had walked into Arracourt expecting a clean victory, not a deadly game of deception and terrain, commanded by men who understood exactly how to destroy them. Yet what happened that day was only a preview. The deadliest moment, the turning point, was still waiting in the fog. And when it arrived, the Panthers would discover something far more terrifying than American firepower: American accuracy, American speed, and American strategy. Because the secret reason the Shermans won, the real reason, hadn't been revealed yet. Not until the next day, not until the next attack, not until the Panthers made one final, fatal push. And that truth, it changes everything we thought we knew about this battle. On September 20th, 1944, the fog returned, thicker, colder, heavier, as if nature itself was trying to repeat the previous day. But this time, the Americans were ready, and the Germans were desperate. The Panther crews, humiliated by the losses of the 19th, were determined to strike back with force. Their officers insisted that the previous defeat had only been a matter of visibility and confusion. They believed that if the Panthers pushed harder, faster, and in larger numbers, they would crush the Americans before they had a chance to react. In truth, nothing was the same. Sherman crews across Arracourt spent the night digging hull-down positions along ridges, valleys, and sunken roads. They camouflaged tanks beneath tree branches, cut grooves into the muddy ground for better traction, and memorized local terrain by lantern light. They knew where every slope curved, where every wheat field dipped, where every line of sight narrowed. They knew that the Panthers would return, and they knew the Germans believed technology alone would save them. But the Americans had something weightier than steel. They had experience, skill, and commanders who didn't think in straight lines. Colonel Abrams, after reviewing the previous day's battle, made a decision that would define the coming hours. He ordered his men not just to defend, but to counterattack when the moment appeared. He knew the Panthers would advance in dense formations. He knew they would come from the high ridge east of town. And he knew something the Germans didn't, that close-range engagements nullified the Panthers' most powerful weapon, its long 75mm gun. At dawn, barely shapes in the gray, the Panthers returned. More of them. The 113th Panzer Brigade was no longer acting alone. Fresh armored units from the 111th Panzer Brigade had arrived, bringing more tanks, more artillery, and more confidence. Somewhere just beyond the fog, dozens of Panthers crawled forward, their engines growling. To the German commanders, this battlefield felt like destiny. Their maps showed open fields, perfect for long-range killing. They believed American Shermans were weak, poorly armored, and nearly out of ammunition. They believed their reinforcements would finally break through. But they were advancing blind. The fog thickened, swallowing the fields in opaque white. The Panthers were forced to creep forward at barely walking speed. Visibility was so poor they could hardly see 10 meters in front of their guns. German officers, unable to identify terrain landmarks, ordered tanks into clusters, believing mass would protect them. It did the opposite. Around 6 a.m., American tank crews, hearing engines more than seeing shapes, radioed across the battalion network. Panthers approaching the northern ridge. Abrams, calm and direct, issued orders. Shermans moved from their positions like shadows, advancing along forest trails, flanking hills, looping behind barns and hedgerows to set up crossfire points. This was not the chaotic scramble of the previous day. It was organized, precise, calculated.
Then the first German shells came, blind guesses fired through the fog. Earth erupted beside American tanks, bark shattered from tree trunks, soil rained across hulls. But the Shermans didn't fire back yet. They waited, engines low, turrets aligned. They wanted the Panthers close. Minutes passed, slow and suffocating. Then came the moment.
A Panther emerged from the fog, its turret swiveling, barrel raised, completely unaware of the Sherman parked less than 50 yards away. The Sherman fired point blank. The shell tore through the Panther's side armor as easily as a knife through wet cloth. Flames burst from the engine compartment. A second Panther rolled into view. The Sherman crew reloaded and fired again, another direct hit. Panicked, the remaining Panthers tried to adjust formation, but fog robbed them of direction. One Panther reversed too quickly, colliding with another. Metal groaned and screamed. German crews shouted, unable to see or coordinate. Meanwhile, the Americans moved like ghosts. Shermans didn't stay still after firing. They shot, repositioned, vanished into fog, then reappeared somewhere else. German shells whistled through the fields, exploding against nothing, smashing harmlessly into trees and dirt. The Panther's biggest advantage, its accuracy at long range, had been erased. As the fog lifted slightly, American artillery joined the battle. Shells thundered across the valley. One barrage landed directly among a line of Panthers, throwing earth over their hulls, knocking commanders off balance. German tank crews, disoriented and deafened, radioed frantically for support. Their commanders insisted they push deeper. Deeper meant death. Around mid-morning, Sherman tanks from Company C, 37th Tank Battalion, advanced along a narrow farm road near the village of Bézange-la-Petite. They formed a wedge, moving uphill. At the top of the rise, 3 Panthers appeared, black outlines against a pale sky. For a moment, both sides froze. Then the Shermans fired first, their rounds striking the thinner lower hulls of the Panthers. Those German tanks began burning almost instantly, plumes of smoke rising like black flags. The remaining Panthers tried to fire downhill, but the angle worked against them. Their high-velocity guns overshot, shells screaming overhead harmlessly. By noon, the battlefield was a graveyard of steel. Craters pocked the earth, flames roared from open hatches, smashed turrets lay twisted in mud, and yet the fighting intensified. The Germans committed more tanks, more men, convinced that weight alone would win the day. They refused to believe the Shermans could be beating them. But the truth was undeniable. Shermans used speed to reposition constantly, turning defense into aggression. They struck from flanks, from behind ridges, from concealed spots. German tank crews, many young and unfamiliar with their machines, struggled with the Panther's slow turret controls. Its armor was strongest at the front, yet the Shermans never attacked head-on. They turned the Panther's advantage into a weakness. By late afternoon, one German officer radioed headquarters, "The Americans are everywhere and nowhere. We are firing at ghosts." Abrams continued moving his battalion like a giant chessboard, lifting units here, repositioning units there, always keeping the Panthers in confusion. His strategy wasn't just about surviving the battle. It was about breaking the morale of the Germans who believed Panther superiority was absolute. At one point, an American tank commander remarked, "They think we're scared of them. They can't see how scared they are of us." As the sun began to sink, fog returned again, rolling across the battlefield in slow waves. For a brief moment, everything felt still. The world shrank to white silence until headlights appeared. A Panther unit advanced along a sunken lane, engines loud, confident they had outmaneuvered the Shermans. They were wrong. Abrams had predicted the move. On September 21, 1944, just before dawn, the battlefield near Arracourt felt wrong, unnaturally still, unnervingly quiet, like the world was holding its breath. American tank crews stood beside their Shermans, exhausted, hungry, eyes burning red from smoke and sleepless hours. Many expected the Germans to retreat after the brutal losses of the last 2 days. But Colonel Abrams did not believe it. He knew the enemy was not finished. He knew the Panthers would strike again because Germany had no choice. And he knew why. The Germans weren't just trying to win a single engagement. They were trying to prove something much bigger, that the Panther tank, the crown jewel of Nazi engineering, was unstoppable. If the Shermans continued to destroy them, that myth would collapse, and with it, German morale. That was why the next attack would be the most violent yet. Just after sunrise, sound replaced silence. Not engines, not artillery, voices. German voices shouting orders from somewhere in the fog. Tank crews scrambled into turrets, Sherman engines roared awake, radios crackled with urgent messages. Then, almost without warning, the first Panther shells screamed overhead, exploding across the ridgelines in deafening bursts of dirt and flame. The Germans had returned. Dozens of Panthers pushed forward through the thick morning haze, fanning out across the wheat fields east of Arracourt. Their commanders believed that if they advanced fast enough before the Americans could reposition, they would overwhelm the front line. But there was one thing they didn't know. Abrams had already shifted several Sherman units into new positions while they slept. The Shermans were waiting. The German formation split into 3 groups, a tactical decision that should have given them flexibility. Instead, it broke their strength. Fog prevented the 3 units from seeing each other. Radio static severed their communication. Each Panther group advanced blind, not knowing exactly where the others were. It was the opening Abrams needed. Without hesitation, he ordered one flank of Shermans to swing west so their guns pointed directly at the exposed sides of the advancing Panthers. Another group crawled along a forest trail to the east, angling behind the Germans, and the last group waded along the ridgeline at the center, silent but ready to unleash hell. There was no dramatic trumpet blast to mark the moment, no cheering, no bravado, just a single sharp order crackling across the radio network. Fire. The battlefield lit up. From 3 angles, shells slammed into Panther hulls and turrets, punching through armor that was never designed to protect against fire from the side and rear. One Panther erupted instantly, ammunition cooking off inside the turret like thunder trapped in steel. Another caught fire, flames roaring from its engine deck. A third spun sideways, track shattered, turret limp. German crews panicked. Some bailed from their tanks, running through the fog as fire devoured steel. Others tried to turn their turrets toward the Sherman positions, but the Panther design betrayed them. The heavy turret ring and complex gearing made rotation painfully slow. Before many could even line up a shot, another shell struck home. Within minutes, the German armored assault fell into chaos. The Panthers, expecting domination, found themselves surrounded. And this was where the real secret came into play. For decades, historians, tank enthusiasts, even German veterans had struggled to explain how Shermans, lighter, thinner, armed with smaller guns, shredded Panthers again and again at Arracourt. Some pointed to training, others to terrain, others to weather. All were partly right, but none explained the full truth. The real advantage was something invisible, something hidden, something built into every Sherman tank on that battlefield. It was the stabilizer, a piece of equipment so advanced for its time that most of the world barely understood it. The Sherman's main gun was equipped with a gyro stabilization system, crude by modern standards but revolutionary in 1944. It allowed Sherman crews to fire with accuracy while on the move. No Panther in the world could do that. The Germans had to stop before firing. They had to freeze themselves in place. And in tank warfare, movement is life, stillness is death. That single mechanical edge changed the entire rhythm of battle. Shermans could fire while maneuvering, repositioning, flanking, withdrawing, charging. Panthers had to halt before shooting, and in the fog and chaos of Arracourt, stopping meant becoming a target. Many Sherman crews did not even realize how much the stabilizer helped them. They simply felt that their aim was steadier, their shots truer, their firing faster. But German commanders noticed. After the war, captured German tank officers wrote reports filled with disbelief, how the Shermans fired faster, fired more accurately, and from seemingly impossible angles. It wasn't magic, it was engineering. The Sherman, mocked for being inferior, had been hiding a silent advantage inside its turret, one that erased the Panther's technological superiority. And the Americans used it masterfully.
Back on the battlefield, as the Panthers continued to burn across the French countryside, the German advance disintegrated. Units tried to retreat east, but muddy fields slowed movement. Others attempted to turn south, only to find more Shermans waiting. As artillery shells thundered above and smoke rolled across the ground, the German force collapsed into desperation. One Panther, hull cracked and burning, lurched forward in a last attempt to ram a Sherman. The American crew saw it coming and fired on the move, their guns steady even as the tank rolled backward over uneven terrain. The shell ripped through the Panther's turret, ending the charge instantly. By mid-afternoon, the 111th Panzer Brigade, once confident, once unstoppable, was broken. Abrams stepped out of his command tank, boots sinking into scorched mud. His men gathered around him. No cheering, no celebration, just the heavy silence of victory earned through skill, grit, and blood. Around them, fields still smoldered. Blackened tank hulls stood frozen in strange, twisted poses, like statues carved by violence. Sherman crews helped wounded German tankers from burning machines, providing water and bandages. Even in war, humanity flickered. But beneath the surface, something deeper had changed. The Panther was no longer untouchable. It was no longer feared. The myth was dead. The battlefield proved it. And as days passed, German morale collapsed. Panther crews began to dread encounters with the Shermans. Commanders questioned strategy. Hitler, furious, blamed incompetence. But the truth was simple. Germany had built a masterpiece of killing. America had built a masterpiece of winning.
Arracourt was more than a battle. It was a turning point. Proof that the war was shifting, that brute strength alone could not save the Reich, that belief in invincibility was a lie. And that lies the mystery you saw at the beginning. How did the weaker tank win? How did the underdog turn the predator into prey? How did the Sherman, lighter, thinner, mocked, emerge victorious? The answer wasn't a miracle. It wasn't luck. It wasn't fate. It was clarity, courage, movement, strategy, experience, and a silent stabilizer system hidden inside every turret. A feature so overlooked that German intelligence never fully understood it. By the end of September, the Americans had destroyed more than 4 dozen Panthers near Arracourt, one of the most astonishing mismatches in armored warfare. The Shermans rolled forward into October stronger than they began. The Germans rolled away broken, their myth shattered forever. And somewhere in those fog-covered fields, beneath burned steel and broken tracks, a truth was etched into history. The most dangerous weapon is not the strongest machine, but the smartest mind behind it. The mystery was never about how Shermans survived. It was about how they learned to win. And that secret changed the war.